Today we're going to take a look at the latest version of my pipeline add-on that enables you to do stuff in Blender and bring it into Godot. So we're on version 2.2 right now. I've kind of decided as I'm going to do these videos going forward, we're not going to have time in the video to go over all of the features of the add-on. It's grown to a point where there's just way too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go over the version updates. So in this version, we do have .blend file support, which is awesome. I'll show you how that works soon. There's this Blender material slot to Godot path feature, which someone asked for, and I think is kind of cool. It allows you to basically dump the path name right into a Blender material slot, and that path points to a TRES file on the Godot side, and then it'll automatically create that material. We get a skip object toggle, and there's some improvements to trimesh and the simple collision structure. All of the collisions work in the same hierarchy, meaning you can create static bodies, rigid bodies, area 3Ds. You can create all primitive shapes, and you can create simple and trimesh collisions all under that same structure. So you get lots of control there. And there's a disable texture exporting option. I showed this in my most recent video, which I'll link up above. But basically, if you're dealing with a level or a model that has a lot of 4K textures that are just huge in size, you may not actually want to export that every single time because it can make the process really slow. One more thing I'm going to be trying out this time around is I'm going to actually have a full example project on GitHub that you can clone or you can just straight up download. This is going to be for Godot version 4.3 dev 5. So if you have that version of Godot, you can just download this project and you can run it. It's going to include a .blend file, and then you can see the running scene in Godot. I've included the .blend file that has everything in it, all the collision shapes and everything, but also a blank one. So if you want to kind of try to follow along and see if you can recreate all the steps, then you can do that. We got some nice collisions here. So this little cylinder object is wrapping these collisions pretty nicely. This is what I wanted to show you with the chairs, right? So these objects are on a different layer, right? They're on layer 2, the capsule is on layer 1. Some other stuff in the layer, we can see that all the collision shapes look good. We can jump on top of this stuff, so like this table, we can jump on, and all these chairs. They all work the same way. So I want to show you that when you design this stuff in Blender, it's very easy to apply these settings to all of these objects, kind of basically with one click. So this is a fully functioning collision shape, right? You can see I can kind of squeak around the door here, and I bump into the collision shape here. If I open it up, it swings open, and then we get inside and we hit these collision shapes here. So that's all functional. I don't know what happens if it hits you. It kind of bumps you a little. So, okay, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, that's basically the features of the little demo, so you can see everything going on here. In this level, I kit bashed this really quickly. It's a game pack that comes from OpenGameArt.org. I'll link it down below, but it was just a free open source kind of asset, and I kit bashed this in Blender really quickly. And what I'll show you in a minute, if you stick around for the part where we go through everything, you'll see that I really didn't do it very precisely. There's some really good optimizations we can do just using the pipeline. Just trying to work as quickly as we can. You know, sometimes we don't have that super polished result, but we're trying to make a game, right? So sometimes you got to work through things quickly. We do a little bit of stuff with these chairs to set collision layers. So if I pull up this rigid body here, you'll see we're on layer 2, but we're masking 1 and 2. So I'll show you what that kind of looks like. And then we've got some lights in the scene. So what I will mention about lights is that that's not officially a part of the pipeline yet. I am going to work it in eventually when I get time. So the level has this GLTF imported file, which is actually a blend file import. I'll show you that later. And we get the imported section here, which has all the stuff in it, right? So, and then we have this lights section. So that's not part of the asset pipeline. And then the character body 3D is also just separate. So that just has a camera parented to it. We have a simple over the shoulder kind of control there. One more quick thing I almost forgot, and this is a huge quality of life improvement in my opinion. So thanks to Tumbleweb on YouTube for pointing it out. But if you go to project settings, and then import defaults, if you go down to scene, and then you can actually just put in the import script for your GLTF file import. So this is a huge time saver. You get the add-on from the asset lib on the Godot side of things and go into your add-ons folder, and then GLTF importer, you can just add that, hit save. So now if I have my blend file assets here, and if I just, let's say I just copy paste this one, and you get this copy. And by default, it gets the import script, right? So that is a huge time saver. So I would say to anybody using the add-on, please go ahead and enable that setting. It will make your life a lot easier. Okay, so let's jump into the Blender side of things. We're gonna work with this level 01 blank file. So if you got the GitHub repo, if you pulled that or cloned it, you will see that asset there. So that's what we're working with here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to hide this ceiling. I'm just going to do a power save here so that the blank file is kind of kept as is, and then now we're working with this new thing. So in this model, I think I've talked about it a little bit, but it was kit bashed really quickly. What I want to do is I want to get some wall collisions. So you'll notice that I've already organized all the outer wall pieces into this collection. So we have them here. But I'm going to actually remove the cylinders, these posts, because what I'm going to do for those is I'm going to create cylinder collisions on those guys. So the easiest workflow here is just to Shift D duplicate all those pieces. We're going to hit M, and then I'm going to move them to this outer wall collisions section. So once all those meshes are separated out, we can very easily we're going to create a box collision with no body on it because we're going to parent it to another thing that's going to have the static body. And then we're going to display wireframe, discard the mesh, and then apply the scale. So this button is new, this checkbox. And what I'll say is that you almost always want to apply the scale before setting collisions. It has to do with the bounding box, and basically you're using simple collision shapes. So the center of that bounding box and the size of that bounding box really matter, right? So we're going to go ahead and set collisions. And you see what we get is we get all these wireframe objects. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's jump into Godot. And so in my scene, I removed the level from it. So now we can drag in our new one. So you can see we can drag in our .blend file here directly. And then we get the original, right? So this first node is the original scene that maintains the link to the blend file. And then we get this one here. Now we don't really want all these other meshes because these are just the modules that we use to make our scene from. So we can deal with that in a sec. What I will say is that this is kind of a trade-off of using the .blend, right? So in Godot, if you use the GLTF option, and this is kind of baked into that export button, you can actually control whether you're using selected objects, visible objects, whatever. So for our use case, there is a feature we can use to get around this. We're just going to select all of these things, and then we're going to toggle skip. So if we click on any one of these and we hit display add-on data, you should see state equals skip. We save it, and then it's going to re-import, and then all that stuff is gone. We're going to hide the ceiling. And now you can see that we do have all these collision shapes. They're not parented to anything. So you got a whole bunch of collision shapes that are just kind of floating. I'm actually going to delete this collision shape because we're going to refine this one, right? Outer wall collisions, this door 02, we're just going to delete that because that would block your entry here completely. What we need to do is we're going to actually make this a body only. So we'll go collision none, but we're going to make it a static body. We want to keep the mesh, so we're not going to discard the mesh, and then we can set collision. So now we have a body, and the rest of these are collision shapes, right? So I'm going to grab all these. So shift click all of your collision shapes, and then inside Blender, we're going to shift click this one, hit Control P, parent to object, and then you have this parent relationship set up. So this doorway mesh, and that's an arbitrary choice, right? It doesn't need to be that door. It's going to have all these shapes on it. So let's hit save. We have a static body, right? So there's your static body, and all of those collision shapes are now, parented to that static body, and we have the mesh from the door. We have a little bit more work to do here though, because obviously we need some shapes to come into this doorway here. You might just want to grab, say, the adjacent shape. We're going to Shift D duplicate, and then we can kind of just get it into place and maybe even just scale it, right? We'll scale it and just kind of shift it in here. Overlapping collision shapes is not the end of the world, so we can just do this a couple times and to get this this doorway. All right, so we've got those shapes. What I'll do for these two is I do need to reapply the set collision. So we're going to set it to box, set the body to none, turn on these options, and then set the collisions. So let's hit Control S. And so now over here, you can see we've got some nice rectangle collisions for that. So we can actually walk through this doorway. So moving right along here, we've got the outer wall collision set up, but you see I left out these posts. And what we're going to do for these, we're just going to make them their own static bodies. So I'm going to shift click both of these. Then we can do a cylinder, static body. We want to keep the mesh. We'll apply scale and hit set. So you see that I'm kind of jumping back and forth a lot between Blender and Godot. And that's the whole point of this, right? So we can iterate quickly and kind of make these little design decisions. So we can do the same thing for this back wall over here. So I'm just going to repeat this. So now you can see in this case, I created this actually as the kind of the parent static body. So this guy has all of these wall pieces connected to it. Let's take a look at these desk objects here. There's some optimizations we can do. So we know they're going to be static bodies. They're not going to roll around or move in the scene. And we know that the mesh is repeated multiple times. So I want to show you something interesting. In a previous video, I talked about using the same mesh data in Blender, getting some smart kind of batching things happening. Well, in this one, I want to show you that you can actually do it really kind of brute force. So if you look at these objects on a click here, you see this is desk1.001. This one has a different mesh. This one has a different mesh, and this one has a different mesh. So let's say, you've used Shift D to duplicate all these. You can still get a really intelligent multi-mesh here. So on the Godot side, you're going to need a folder. So I'm just going to create one called multimesh 2. And then you can hit Control-Shift-C to copy that path. And what I want to do is I want to set these guys up as a multi-mesh. So even though they're not using it in Blender, they're not using the same mesh, we can actually create a little optimization here. So don't hit Assign to Mesh. I said to do that in the previous video. We're actually going to assign this data to the objects. We're going to go to the path. You're going to hit multi-mesh, paste in that path, and then we'll just say desk.res. So we hit Set Path, save it. And what you notice now on the Godot side is that we have this multi-mesh. So that's kind of a real quick optimization where you can turn something that was kit bashed very quickly using different meshes into a single draw call that all use that same mesh, right? So it created this multi-mesh object for you. You have an instance count of 4 and everything works nicely. So the only thing we need in addition to that multi-mesh is we do want collision shapes. So you can select those 4 desks. Then you just create a box and a static body. But this time we're going to want to discard the mesh because the multi-mesh is going to be handling drawing it basically. And this is going to be responsible for the physics stuff. So let's go ahead and set collisions. Actually, I'm going to take a step back. I don't want to display wireframe bounds in this case. So we have discard and apply on. And then after importing, you see we get the collision shapes on those 4, even though they're being rendered with a multi-mesh. So the chairs, we won't be able to do the same optimization with because they all need to be separate objects. So we can select all those chairs and we can make them rigid bodies. I'll just throw maybe a sphere on them. So sphere, rigid body, we're going to keep the mesh and we'll apply the scale. So now we can see that we have spheres wrapping around all these, but let's say I want to do something smart on the Blender side to set the collision mask and collision layer. If you go to this text file here that I created, it's a line separated way of setting attributes on any object in Godot. So I'll set the collision layer to 2, and I'll set the collision mask so that it respects layer 1 and respects layer 2. So the way you use this is we're going to hit Control-Shift-C on that chair. And then on the Blender side, we're going to set a path. We're going to go down to the parameter file path. We're going to drop that in and then hit set. If you find that object and you go to the collision, you'll see that those layers are actually set. So that's pretty cool. And all of those rigid bodies will have those set. So that's a really great way to set things consistently. I'm not going to go over it in this video, but obviously anything here that's in the path you can set. You can set scripts, you can set materials, shaders, I have a nav mesh feature. We've used multimesh, physics material. Like you can do, there's so much stuff you can do just here from the path setter. And then this one we can do the same. So we'll show this little feature. This is a new part of the add-on. We get this drop down and I can hit chair. So we'll set the parameter file there and I'll set that collision. So basically with like a couple clicks, you've replicated that whatever function that goes to all the other chairs, we've replicated to this one. So the last thing I want to look at here is how you create a collision shape or, a collision on something that's animated. The first thing you really need to think about is where the pivot point is. So on this object, the pivot point is on the side. So I can't just straight up convert this to a box collision. And it has to do with how the box collisions work and how these primitive shapes work. When you do that, what's happening under the hood, if I hit set collisions, it's reorienting the origin into the middle, and we don't want that. You need the origin to stay off to the side so that when you animate it, you can pivot about that origin on the z-axis, right? So that's no good. What we need to do is we need to Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to move this to, I'm going to call this storage box collisions. And then we just need to convert this object to a collision shape. So a little thing to be careful about here, when you duplicate that, you don't want an animation on the collision shape. So you got to clear that animation out. So we're going to convert this to a box with no body, and we can display wireframe, discard the mesh, and then hit set. So now we have this collision shape. And what we can do is we can parent it to the original thing that's animated. So we hit Control P, parent to object, and then of course when this guy moves and pivots on its origin, the collision shape moves with it. Now what we need on the actual mesh, so if you look closely, here's what I'm clicked on, not the collision shape, but the actual mesh. We're going to set no collision shape, but have a static body on it. So you can animate static bodies. There's no issue with that in Godot. We're going to uncheck wireframe and discard mesh and then set. So on the Godot side, if you look real closely, you can see we do have this collision shape here. But how does the animation work? So if we find it in the tree, find animation player, you will find that you get this error, could not resolve track, blah, 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 blah. So the way you need to fix this is, and I'm trying to work on a solution to this. I haven't figured out a way to do it yet. The problem is that you've basically reparented it, right? So the add-on has recreated this structure where Blender tried to animate this object originally, but now we need to actually animate the static body. So the way you fix it is that we go into our blend file here, go to import, then we have to go to advanced, and down underneath the actual animation, so if you hit cage open, you have to save to file. We're going to select a path for it. So I'll just call this cage box open 2, and then keep custom track, and then hit import. So when you do that, you're saving that animation to this resource, and then you can mess with it at that point. So now you can see we actually have the capacity to delete this track or add a different track. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a track. We're going to do a 3D rotation, and we got to find this static body that we want to use. So it's going to be this one, this cage box large door 01. We add that, and then we can just copy the keys. There we go. So that worked. So now we should see, there we go. There's our animation. So that's all good. And we can delete that track, right? And then our animation is good. So the only thing that isn't great about this workflow, if you go to animation, manage, you're going to need to save this. So let's save that one. So that's fine. Now we've saved it with this configuration. If you go back to Blender and hit save again, the re-import process will occur. And the problem is that this track that doesn't work, like this track that doesn't exist, will always come back. So while you're iterating, I would say don't worry about this error, but you should clean it up at the end. So one more tiny thing I forgot to do. We're just going to throw a box static body on the floor mesh here. So we'll set that collision. Okay, so with all of that done, we're kind of ready to wrap up this little scene here. Another thing you can do is, once you're done kind of iterating to this level or quickly iterating, you can hit remove original node. And that means that, no more changes will come in from Blender. So we know that in the animation player, we do have to delete this track that doesn't exist, right? If you want that warning to go away, this guy, then we have to delete that track. So it's a little bit annoying. I am working on it. One more tiny thing we need to do. So I changed basically the node name here. I think in my script, it was expecting V2.2 level 01 imported. So if we change this to level 01 underscore imported, it should work. Okay. So with all that done, we should be able to hit run here. And there we go. So here's our level. We can see our collision shapes are, set up exactly as we set them up. We should get some fun little dynamics there. The tables are set up. That's all good. We can press K to open up this thing, right? And then this collision shape is functional as well. So one more feature we're going to tag on here really quickly. Let's just hide this for a sec. Let's say you want to apply a custom material to anything, to something here in the scene. Someone came up with this idea and I implemented it. It was pretty easy, right? So let's say you have this object and it has these materials on it. But in reality, let's say you want to use this test material that you've created on the Godot side. Well, all you have to do to make that happen is if you hit Control-Shift-C and you come back to Blender, just remove those materials and then create a new material in Blender. And this is basically a dummy material. You paste in this path and then you hit Save. And then it'll recognize that and then bring in whatever material that is. So of course, the drawback here is whenever you drag that scene in again, we're going to have to delete this from the animation player, right? Because that's the dead track from the thing that doesn't exist. And then I wanted to rename this. So we'll do uncheck that, then clear this name here. And we should be good to run. So now we can see that red containers in the scene. We see our animation works, so that's cool. And everything else is there as well. So thanks for watching this one. Let me know if you have any questions on the add-on. It is a moving target. I'm working on it constantly. I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to improve the 3D workflow for Godot. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.